Hi, everyone. It's Jeremy on the Online Broadcast Blueprint, and I'm excited to have a special guest. I met Chris J.Y. Kelley here this week, and those of you that are in the community-oriented radio community, what is the name of my group? The community...
Community Online
Radio Network. Thank you for helping me. Yeah. For those of you on there, you've seen Chris make an appearance there too. But okay, let me put this up right here. Not right now, but as soon as we're done, okay, as soon as you're watching this interview with Chris, I want you to go to the FIZZradio.com. Now, you guys know this is my mea culpa right at the beginning. You know, the first rule in public speaking is you never apologize right up front, Chris. You know that. So, but here's my mea culpa right up front. You guys know I don't mean to sound like I'm anti-music, because I'm not at all. But I've had a few people think I'm anti-music stations, and obviously I play music on my station. I'm not anti-music. The position I've kind of held is that it's harder to differentiate yourself if your focus is just the music, right? That's why in my world, the hyper-localization thing has worked well for me. However, I've said this before also, the magic happens between your songs. The magic happens between your songs. It's what you do in between the music that keep your listeners there. You don't just want to be a playlist, right? So I say that because my guest, Chris, runs an awesome music station, but what makes it so cool is all the fun stuff that goes with the music. And I think that's what 90% of the music stations are missing. So Chris, I was super excited to have you come on and share, and I've already talked too much, but first, Chris and I graduated from high school the same year, so we're the same age.
85, baby.
5, that's class of 5. So you stayed in it longer than I did. You worked in radio longer than I did. But a lot of our history is similar. I think you were working in bigger towns than I was, so you're better than I am probably. But I wanted to have you give us a little of your backstory, and up to the point where you decided, hey, I'm going to do an online radio station. So I'll be quiet now and we'll hear from you, Chris.
Man, so going back to the start, I guess, I remember in the 5th grade wanting to be a DJ on the radio. I grew up, my parents had a duplex, and so we lived in one half of the house, and we would rent out the other half of the house. And one summer, like 3 or 4 of the DJs from the local radio station rented the other half of the house. Nice. And it was a great summer, jamming. This was probably the early 80s, and they'd be playing their air checks out, washing the car and stuff like that, and they didn't mind some punk kid coming up and asking them questions about it, and I kind of fell in love with it then. So learned my high school had a radio station. They had converted a janitor's closet under a stairwell into a little studio where they had a mixer and some albums up on a shelf and a couple of turntables, and we were able to play. Didn't transmit, but we played it over the intercom into the commons after school for an hour. And then we would DJ the sock hops and things after the football games and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun. And then my college has a radio station, 90 FM, WWSP in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. I think it's a 30,000 watt college radio station now. And, was program director there. And that station's known for the world's largest trivia contest.
Oh, nice.
So 54 hours of oldies music and trivia questions, and a bunch of teams calling in answers. And so that's a lot of fun. But then, got a job doing overnights at the local station in Stevens Point, central Wisconsin, WSPT, and did overnights there. And then got a job out in Olympia, Washington.
Right.
So loaded up my Toyota Corolla and drove across the country. and worked on KQ92, KQEU. It was an AM stereo station in Olympia, Washington. I did the night show there. And so it was a challenge on an AM station doing the night show because, you know, if you know anything about AM, you got to power down the transmitter at sunset. And this station was, or this, you know, the station was so low power after we would power down the studio or down the transmitter that I couldn't even hear the air signal at the studio. I had to do my show listening to the studio monitors because the signal wouldn't even go from the tower to where the studio was located. Wow. So anyway,
how long were you in Olympia, by the way? How long did you work there?
About a year.
Okay, and then did you go right back to the upper Midwest from there?
Yeah, from Olympia, went to Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And that was a blast. We signed on a new radio station, Top 40 Flamethrower in Madison, Wisconsin, WTFX 94.1 The Fox.
Nice.
And it was a brand new station, and we had a program director who was like, you know, pretty much anything goes. Let's just be irreverent and you know, go after the legacy Top 40 in Madison. And we kicked ass for a year and a half. And then they changed formats ultimately. And then when that happened, I left and went to WZOK in Rockford, 97 ZOK, was music director, did the night show there. And that's when I picked up the moniker Jammin' J.Y. Kelley.
There you
was
go.
In Rockford. And yeah, met my wife and stuck around.
Nice. That is so awesome. And so many things that you say are, you know, that's just the common history of those that got into radio at the time that we did. I started, we had a college station as well. And I got a job as when the broadcasting I went to Cameron University, which was a school in Southwest Oklahoma. And just coincidentally, the fall of 85, when I started, was the first year they were starting a broadcast program, and they started a student, you know, run station. Of course, you know, the bummer is they made it like a classical music NPR thing, which is exactly what college students don't want to be playing. But I understand they did it to get donors and all kinds of that. So anyways, the very first thing, Mark Norman, I think he's passed away, great guy. I learned a lot from him. He was the guy running it, and he'd been in broadcasting forever. And so he, right out of the gate, I think I was the first intern that they ever placed. He called a radio station and said, hey, we want to send this intern out. So I went out to this station, KRLG, 100,000 watt FM station out in the wheat field as an intern, did that for a few months. And then their overnight guy left, and they asked me, I was still at this point thinking I could have a career behind the scenes in radio. You know, I didn't think I could be a disc jockey. I didn't think I had the voice for it. But then the PD said, hey, why don't you, we have an opening at overnights. Why don't you do it? And I'm like, okay. And I did it. And it took me a while. I had a few uncomfortable air check sessions with my PD. He's the one that told me that we talked about smiling last time we talked. Now we talk about, he's the one that said, I don't want to steal your thunder, but Chris mentioned that they, in one studio, they had a mannequin in the corner. And
you're talking to one person.
And that's the thing. You're talking to one person. And so you look at that mannequin. That was the person you're talking to. Well, what my PD said, we had a big, this was scary, especially in Tornado Alley during tornado season. Our transmitter was literally on site 8 feet from our mixer. There's a wall, a big window, and then bam, 100,000 watt transmitter right there. But there was a big glass window and you could see your reflection. And so Richard, my PD, says, I want you to look in that window and you smile. You make sure you're smiling on every break. Because I remember the first time I listened to the air check, I wanted to quit because I thought I sounded so bad. I was so flat, no energy. And that's when Richard said, dude, you got to just smile. And that was
Smile. It takes a while to hear yourself. I remember the first time I heard myself recorded in, my high school radio station. I'm like, that's not me. And people are like, that's totally you. It sounds exactly because you hear yourself through your head, when you're speaking.
Yeah, but that was so much fun. So much fun. There was another thing you said, and now it escapes me, but hopefully it'll come back to me. But the reason I wanted to have you on, this idea of, the magic happens between the songs, right? You guys have your imaging is spot on. Your what you do on social media is spot on. Everything just looks super slick, super professional, and your background is in marketing, so I'm sure that helps. But I'm just being honest. When I look at your product, your website, your social media, it's intimidating because I don't know how to make things look that good. So I wonder if you have any tips for those of us that maybe aren't professional marketing people as to how can we take some of what you're doing and apply that to our own little radio stations. Any thoughts on that?
There's a lot of questions in there, Jeremy. So I think, so I guess first of all, you and I talked the last time we chatted a couple of days ago about when we were on the air in the late 80s, early 90s, there was no social media.
Right.
The radio station was the product, and that's what we were promoting. And that was pretty much it. That was our only content channel. And we would, at least in Madison, we ran some billboards occasionally because it was a brand new radio station. When I went there, it wasn't even on the air yet, and we signed it on and stuff. So we teased it a few months in advance with a billboard campaign. And then when we launched, there was a TV campaign. So really that was the only other external media, external to the radio station. Mm-hmm. These days, I don't care whether you're a big network FM station or just a hobby radio internet station like you and me. Mm-hmm. You've got the radio station that you're running, but then you've got all your social channels that you need to be producing content for, your Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever. And there's just so much more to the sort of your network than just the radio station anymore. So yeah, you need to be producing content, not just for your on-air sound, but also content for your Facebook and make that entertaining. And, Instagram and whatever else you're doing. For me, it's the FIZZ is a hobby. Mm-hmm. I'd love to make a little bit of money at it, enough maybe to cover the hosting fees and whatnot, and buy some new gear every so often. But for now, it's just a labor of, some guys have a hot rod in their garage. I've got a radio station. So
that's a great analogy. That's exactly what it is. I was watching some of your videos on your YouTube channel. I saw some guitars hanging on the wall in one. So you're a musician also.
I play some guitar, played in the church band and stuff.
Awesome.
I like the church band because nobody throws beer bottles at you.
Exactly. And, I find that that's a commonality. There's a lot of musicians that are drawn to radio because I'm a musician too. There's a lot of non-musicians, but maybe music files, people that are really into music that are drawn to it. And then there are also, and I kind of fell into this, like you said, in 5th grade, you really liked radio. I was fascinated with the idea of people being able to hear you everywhere. And even as a little kid, growing up in Oklahoma at night, I could pull in WLS from Chicago. So I'd listen to WLS, or KOMA out of Oklahoma City was another big, 50,000 watt AM that you could pick up all over the US at night. I was just, even though I love music, it was just the fascination of radio, any kind of radio, talk radio, sports radio, news radio. I just loved radio. And so that was a big draw for me. And I don't know, I've never really lost that bug. So what was it then that at some point you made the decision, I'm going to start an online radio station? What got you to that point?
Well, I've been out of radio for a long time. I think I left ZOK in 92, 91 or 92.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then, worked part-time at a couple of stations on the occasional weekend and stuff, off and on.
Okay.
Early 90s, but I haven't been on the air in a long time. And, I've always kind of had the bug, it never really leaves you. I guess if you've been in radio, and I've talked with other people, friends of mine that were in radio, and they say the same thing. You catch this bug and man, the industry sucks. It sucks now more than it did then. I mean, then it was $12,000 a year and all the free t-shirts you can eat.
Yeah. That was about it.
Now you can't even get a job as a new person in, most of them are automated or, syndicated somehow. They flip a switch after the morning show and, and it's all on the satellite. So it doesn't matter anymore. But, the barrier to entry now for somebody to just launch a streaming internet radio station is so low with a software like RadioDJ or something like that, like I use on the FIZZ, and you mentioned you're using it on Radio Valley also.
Mm-hmm.
You can automate a radio station and make it sound remarkably like it used to back when the fond memories that I have from doing it back in the day. And so part of the fun for me is, how can I make the FIZZ sound as much like, it radio did back in the day. I listened back to some of my old air checks. My wife for Christmas gave me a legacy box subscription. So I got a bunch of my old reel-to-reel air checks digitized that have been sitting in a box for 35 years and got them back the other day. And I'm listening back to some of these old air checks from Olympia that I haven't heard in forever. Mm-hmm. And, Fox air checks that I hadn't heard in forever and ZOK air checks. I'm like, man, that holds up.
Yeah.
The audio, awesome. The tapes have deteriorated. So I've got to do some, clean up on them. But
the radio was just so much fun back then.
Yeah, it was. You could, you just get excited talking up a song ramp and hitting a post or talking with callers and, just having fun.
And you're part of, and I think every industry has a certain amount of this, but in radio, there are certain things that only other radio people would understand, like talking up a ramp and hitting the post, right? We'd always brag, I hit more posts than a drunk driver. That was the whole thing. It was like, no one else knows what the heck you're talking about, but just the craft of radio. It was just so much fun. And it has kind of died off because of technology changes,
technology, people just consume media differently now than they did back then. And, partly because there's just more, more availability of different kinds of media that's so personalized. You can set up a certain playlist or smart playlist in Apple Music or Spotify or something like that, and you can listen to a whole genre of you want techno pop. Great,
it is.
You can listen to techno pop all day long, and it'll just feed you more of that. You don't get that with traditional media like a radio station or even live TV. So I don't know if that'll ever come back. We're competing against, a radio station, especially a hobby internet radio station, is competing against all of these other media outlets, not the least of which is probably a Spotify playlist. But, again, if you're in it to make money, then that's probably not a wise choice.
But here's the thing. You mentioned the low barrier of entry. Literally, if a guy's got a computer, he can start an internet station, get a microphone,
and enough, recorded music.
You need music, but
or something to say. So I guess my question then is why an online radio station versus, say, a podcast with several episodes? And I've been sort of thinking through that in my head lately too. If you could do, my radio station is 24/7, 365. I could do a radio show for an hour, record it, put it up as a podcast. Somebody can download it, listen to it on demand. And I could make.
So that's an interesting idea, because I've thought of that. I've got on my other station, my classic guitar rock station, we just started running a guy, and I did it for a while. I had a show called the Classic Guitar Rock Time Machine, and I had it playing on probably 8 different stations. It just got to be too much work. But where was I going with this? Oh, I love that idea of recording an hour show. How would that licensing work if you did it as a podcast? Would you run afoul of licensing issues if you did that? I don't know the answer. I don't know.
I can tell you what I know, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak definitively, but and you've mentioned on your videos too, you use Live 365. I use Live 365 also, in large part because they handle the music licensing for a 24/7 internet radio station. There are, at least one other service that I found, Mixcloud, that is for like DJs, like club DJs and stuff like that, for episodic uploads. And so you can upload, say, a music show for an hour or two. People could download it, and they cover the licensing for that. I don't know a lot about it, but
so there's an option there. There's a route to go there. Okay, I love that. I want to come back to one thing you mentioned earlier, just because it was fascinating to me. I think it was when you went to Madison, you said you got there before the station signed on. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
So, and you were there for a while before you signed on. So I got to ask, because I've never been involved with that. What were you doing as an employee before you guys actually launched? What was your job like during that?
That was so fun, because I'm driving back, and it's 2-3 days driving from Olympia, Washington to Madison, and I would drive all day and then find some hotel to spend the night and call my PD in Madison and say, "Hey, I'm in Steele, North Dakota." And he's like, "Where is that, near a town?" Chris is calling in from Steele.
Yeah.
And I finally got there, and the station's not on yet. I think we had taken over another station in a town, Watertown, Wisconsin, which is east of Madison, maybe, 30, 40 miles. And they moved the transmitter and the tower closer to Madison so they could get a city grade signal over Madison. And so we, ended up promoting it as a Madison radio station. But before it signed on, so I got there maybe a week or two before we actually went live, and we're, recording imaging and setting up. I mean, the engineer was still literally plugging. I think the studio was still under construction. The engineer is still, plugging in mics and setting up the transmitter and stuff like that. But it was a lot of like pre-planning, setting up the, like I said, recording the imaging, kind of brainstorming what some of those sweepers were going to be. And then we had, phone calls and things with the big voice guy to record them so that we had something to play when we did go live. And then when we did go live, there was a big party that night, and we went all day long. We started playing a heartbeat. Dun, 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 nice. Dun, dun. It was all day long, just this heartbeat going. And then I think at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we segued that into the Heart of Rock and Roll, and then into oh geez, I can't believe I don't remember the song. Anyway, it also had a heartbeat. So that was fun.
That's awesome. And see, that was the coolest. So like I spent my last years from like 92 to 95. I worked at Oldies 101.1 here in Spokane. and I came after, but when they signed on in like year or two before I got there, they played Louie Louie for 3 days. Not just the Kingsman Louie, every possible version of Louie Louie you could imagine. There were marching bands playing Louie Louie. It was funny, and I heard some recordings of that. But that fun, goofy stuff that radio stations used to do was awesome. You know, that's the part that I miss, is the fun, crazy stuff. Doing remotes. Used to love to do remotes, and you probably have terrible remote experience. I do. I can tell you about terrible remote experiences, but I mean that was just you know, the fun. One thing you do, which I love, I think this is cool. I want to try and leverage this. You already mentioned that using Radio DJ. By the way, I always plug RadioDJ Dude, Jeff at RadioDJ Dude. And I found out last night, because Chris never told me, there's a video of Jeff interviewing Chris on RadioDJ Dude. So I'm going to put a link to that video in this, because you got to go watch. It's a video about jingles, and the Fizz has great jingles, and you have it down to a science working with Suno, which I'm trying to figure out Suno a little bit. That's another topic. But another thing you've done that's really cool is you have Liz, I think that's her name. You have another host, Liz. Now, of course, Liz just voice tracks, right? But it sounds like Liz is on the it sounds like you do it the right way, to where it sounds like an actual real station with real people. And I love that.
So Liz and I met when I came to ZOK, and she had been there already for about a year. And I've got a video up that we just posted this week with Liz and I sort of reconnecting and talking about that whole history. But yeah, Liz did middays on ZOK back in the early 90s when I worked there. Mm-hmm. And we reconnected a few years ago after many, many years. And, you know, we went to lunch a few weeks ago, and I'm telling her about the Fizz and you know, this music that we play from Hurricane Andrew's huge CD collection. And as I'm talking to her, she's like leaning in, getting all excited. And she's like, man, can I be on? I'm like, hell yeah, you can be on. Let's do this. So we got Liz on the Fizz middays from 10 to 2 Central. Yeah. And then basically it's me the rest of the day. Yeah. Eventually we're going to get Hurricane Andrew on the air in some form or another, whether he'll be a regular DJ or just some host of segments, but he's our music guru. Yeah. And all the music you hear on the Fizz, I was real fortunate, you know, Andrew also was an intern back at ZOK that summer when I worked there. So that's how we met. So like, you know, all three of us who were sort of involved with the FIZZ radio go back to that, you know, that connection at 97 ZOK in Rockford. But Andrew literally has a colossal CD collection. It's like thousands of compact discs. And, you know, when I was telling him about my idea for the Fizz before we went live with it, he's like, what do you need? I'm in. I've got boxes of CDs. He goes, and I'm moving. They're already packed. I will give you the boxes and you hang on to them. I don't have to move them. And then when you're done, give them back. So I spent probably 6 months ripping CDs and cataloging the music, getting everything imported into RadioDJ, you know, and simultaneously sort of getting the imaging set up and recording at least a few dozen voice tracks of me just sort of playing DJ in my office before the station went live. Right. And then when we were ready, we flipped the switch, and then Liz came on afterwards. So she's been on for probably since the beginning of January, doing the midday show for 4 hours in the middle of the day.
So let me ask you about that, because I'm fascinated by this idea of, and I kind of do it on classic guitar. Like I have a guy, my partner Rich, does what we call the graveyard shift, which is he starts at 10 p.m. and goes till 6 a.m. He's the graveyard shift, and then I'm on the rest of the time you hear us. But so how often is Liz updating voice tracks? Is that a weekly thing, a daily thing? How often does she do that?
There's no real set time frame. She has been sending me a batch of maybe 10 or 15 voice tracks.
Okay, cool.
About every couple of weeks. So Liz is a professional voiceover talent. She does audiobooks and radio commercials and things like that. And she's been doing that since she was in radio. She also is on a couple of podcasts.
Nice.
And so, she's been doing voice work professionally through this whole time. Yeah. So, what she's doing on the Fizz is again a labor of love, because her salary is zero.
Yeah, the same as all of our internet salaries. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's awesome. But it's great, and it sounds really good. I mean, you've got great drops. I hear you mixing this all up. And so, and I'm not trying to just inflate your ego, but seriously, you have a really high standard. And I would encourage anyone to go out and listen to how you have put it all together. Don't let it intimidate you. Because to be honest, it's pretty intimidating. Because I'm like, how am I going to compete with that? Because it sounds really polished. It sounds really good.
Appreciate that.
And what you said earlier about, hey, I just wanted to recreate that fun. That's exactly what motivated me to start. And I started it with my classic rock. And I'm trying to incorporate it with my Radio Valley as well, to have that fun. I've talked about the hyper localization, and that's working for me with Radio Valley, but I still want to bring those elements of fun that you have in your station. And you tie it all in. Your Facebook videos are awesome. I watched one yesterday where it's a great idea. And I have videos where I'll talk about it, but you actually produce it and show them how to download the Live 365 app and choose your station as a favorite. That's perfect. I need to do that. So it's stuff like that has been inspiring to me. It's really cool. So everyone needs to go listen to the Fizz at least for an hour to get the full experience and kind of hear what's going on. Do you do any shows? Do you have any shows during the week? Syndicated shows or anything?
No, I've been looking at some. I'm looking for maybe a dance show for Saturday night or Friday night or something like that. And also, I've looked at maybe some countdown shows. There's a syndicated service called Syndicast that is a UK thing, and it's a bunch of syndicated radio shows for people with radio stations. Whether it's an internet radio station or I think some actual broadcast stations pick up some of these shows, and many of them are free. Some of them you need to pay for. Yeah. But you can just sign up for an account at syndicast.com, I think it is, and look at it and, search for different kinds. A lot of them are dance mixes and things, and a lot of them are UK based. So, it's not a huge priority for me, but I have looked at it and just haven't spent enough time really to find something that I really like. I'm still dialing in the FIZZ radio and getting that the way I like it. And there are a couple of local DJs that I know personally who I've been trying to coerce into doing a recorded show. Yeah. And then I could just play it back on the radio station on a Saturday night, So that's an option too. And that could be a lot of fun. One of the things you mentioned was, it's not about the music, and I get what you're talking about with the hyper localization. I believe that 100% what you're saying. And, if anybody has any aspirations of making any money with an internet radio station, I think that's the key to it, is finding your niche and doubling down into that niche. And you're absolutely right. Localization is one niche that, is an obvious one to double down on. Right. And I know Radio Valley is in a rural area that's underserved by traditional broadcast media, and that's presents a huge opportunity for you. Yeah. And I think another potential area where that could work is in a major metropolitan area. I'm thinking Chicago or Milwaukee, is served by big radio stations, legendary radio stations in Chicago and stuff like that. So, the Chicago Metro, Chicagoland is served by whatever, WLS or The Loop or whatever. But, Schaumburg doesn't have its own radio station. So could that be an opportunity for somebody to start an internet radio station that's hyper localized to just, one of the Chicago suburbs, for example, and, bring on guests who are like business leaders in Schaumburg and the mayor of Schaumburg, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rockford is a town of about, 250,000 or so. And we've got about 15 radio stations. And so it's not a very big town. And we've got enough media, and they do a good enough job of being local enough for Rockford, where I'm not sure if that hyper localization approach would work as well in Rockford. It could be done, a hobby radio station could do something, but again, it's not going to be, you could probably go out and sell some ads to a local restaurant or something like that. What I've done on the FIZZ is a music radio station.
Right.
It's playing retro pop and classic alternative, mostly from the 90s. We dip into the 80s a little bit, and we go into the 2000s a little bit, but it's mostly 90s, and in large part because that's the music that Hurricane Andrew, that's the era where he was buying CDs, right? So that's just what he had, which is fortunate for me because I like that music, and that's when I was on the air. So the era tied in perfectly with the sort of the vision that I had for the FIZZ. But, and so for the FIZZ, we're playing music, but like you said, it's what comes in between the songs.
Yep.
And I think where the localization comes into play for us, though maybe it's a little less specific, a little more vague, is that, we're not just playing music of the 90s. Instead, we're sort of letting you into Hurricane Andrew's basement, where he sits down and plays one of his songs from his CD collection for you. So it's localized, not in a geographic sense, but in a sort of a nostalgic sense. You were sort of reliving that era of the 90s.
Well, and here's why that works, right? And I've said on a recent video, I can't remember which one, but I said, guys, go out and listen to 10 online radio stations. 9 of those stations, you'll listen for 40 minutes and just hear song after song after song after song. And then it'll go straight into the network commercials and then right back. You might hear a sweeper coming out of the commercial. There is zero personality, right? The FIZZ has personality. And I love how, and even on my Radio Valley, I have my dumb little AI generated sweepers with the British accent, and I call him Nigel. So I have people that talk about Nigel with me. It's just kind of a little inside joke. Hurricane Andrew, you reference her. That's part of that personality of your station that makes it fun, and people can connect with that. Where if you're just a jukebox, it's hard to get people to connect to that.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, why spend the $60 a month to Live 365?
Totally. Exactly. Yeah. You could just be listen to your Spotify.
Right. Unless you want to listen to your music in your car or something like that.
I think that's the difference between radio guys that start an online radio station and just other people think it would be fun to start a radio station. And even some radio guys that should know better still, play. My pet peeve is, dude, I need to hear who I'm listening to. I want to hear a sweeper. I want to hear someone talk. Maybe I'm in the minority. I don't want to hear 6 songs in a row with nothing between it, right? So anyways, I don't know what your PDs said, but when I was coming up, it was you never go more than 2 songs without something. Okay.
Just about every song has something in between. And I'll listen to the FIZZ and I'm like, that segue shouldn't have happened. There should have been a sweeper there.
Totally. Well, I'm fighting with my this is behind the scenes, and you've helped me a lot here actually, but I'm fighting with my radio DJ now, where my rotation that I have set up has something every other song, right? But I've noticed it's skipping them. And I don't know if it's because it's not picking up all of my voice tracks that I'm in the process of uploading, and maybe it just skips a voice track. I don't know, but I'll hear 4 songs. I'm like, why wasn't there a sweeper there? So I got to figure out some of that too. So there's some things I'm working out, some bugs there that I'm working out. So still got work to do, which the point I wanted to make is we will always be tweaking. 10 years from now, we'll still be tweaking our stations, right? That's part of the fun.
That is the fun, for a hobbyist radio station that wants to make it sound like it did when you were, peaking in the 90s.
Right. Totally.
Listening to the station, hearing the bugs and working them out.
And what's funny, I'll be riding around with my kids, and all of a sudden I'll go, doggone it. And they're like, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, did you hear how quiet that song got before the next one? And they're like, they don't even notice, so that's a radio thing. We're hyper fixated on these little things. There was supposed to be a sweeper there. No one else notices or cares. It's funny. That's just part of the sickness we have, Chris. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, it's funny you mentioned the sickness. Have you ever had the dream where the song is running out and you can't get to the board?
Dude, I have had that dream for forever. And
it's DJ PTSD.
That's exactly what it is. You're and it, what made it worse is I always listened to music when I went to bed. And so I'm drifting off to sleep, and all of a sudden the song's fading out, and I'm like, I don't have my next song queued up. Panic mode. Totally. I thought I was the only one that did that. I totally.
All right. Well, glad we could work through this in therapy.
Here's the dream I have. I can't find the next song. I'm like, there's none of the CDs or albums I need are here. Where are they? None of them are here. There's that. That's a common one too. So yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Okay. So I want to share one. And you think of a crazy story if you want to share one as we wrap this up. I'm working Sunday morning, KKRX. No, this was before it became KRLG FM. So it was a top 40 station. Working Sunday morning. Back then, if you were a full timer, you work 6 days a week, at least at my stations. You'd work your full shift, and then on the weekend, you might have a shorter shift or whatever. But for me, for years, it was 6-hour shift, 6 days a week. But anyways, I'm working Sunday morning. It's about 9 a.m. And I get a call. It's in the spring. I get a call, and the guy says, really nice guy says, hey, this is a weird question, but where are you located? I said, I'm in Lawton, Oklahoma, Southwest Oklahoma. This guy on a Sunday morning was picking me up from Lake Charles, Louisiana. Now this is an FM, because FMs don't go that far. And he said he could hear me for about 30 minutes. He was picking me up. And then all of a sudden he couldn't hear it anymore. But he thought it was weird that he was, and what it was is there was a local station where he lived that was off the air. But I just thought it was interesting. Lake Charles to Lawton, Oklahoma, it's probably like 600 miles. I mean, it's way too far for him to be picking us up. I just thought that was really weird. And especially for an FM signal, but it was a clear, sunny Sunday morning. And this guy heard us for 30 minutes from like 600 miles away. It's pretty wild. But I don't know if you have any funny stories from your radio days.
Boy, I hadn't thought of any. You put me on the spot here, man.
Oh, sorry.
I could probably come up with something with a little thought. One of the things at the Fox, especially because it was a new station, there was a lot of interest. in this new radio station in town, and we just generated a lot of buzz for this brand new radio station. And we were hot. Everything was high energy.
Yeah.
The music was upbeat and things like that. So there was just a lot of interest in town. It was a new thing going up against the legacy top 40 that had been on the air for decades in Madison.
Awesome.
But so we had relationships with the record labels. I was music director, and we would hook up with, I think when we first signed on, it might have been that weekend or the weekend after, Richard Marx was playing at the Coliseum in Madison. And so it was he was being welcomed by the Legacy FM, the CHR station, welcomes Richard Marx and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we ended up getting backstage passes that we gave away on the air, and then I was able to go in and meet Richard Marx backstage. We had no station swag or anything, I gave him a little button.
Yeah.
I think we had a little button. He looks at me like,
this is what you got?
Button? Come on, man.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's cool. Oh, that is so cool. I want to point people in a direction. If you're a radio nerd like we are, and you've maybe seen some of these, there is I can't remember what it's called, but it's a little kind of documentary about when Scott Shannon went to New York. Yeah. And they put up Z100 basically.
It's called Worst to First.
That's it. Worst to First.
And I think it's on Netflix, and I think it's on YouTube also if you search it. But that's
what I watched.
Great documentary.
And it goes into the whole amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. And that's to me kind of the high water mark, the 80s, early 90s. That's when we were in it. So obviously we're kind of biased toward it, but
yeah. So my PD, Pat Gillen at the Fox, was a Brooklyn boy, and he didn't work at Z100, but he grew up listening to it. Yeah. And then he worked in Schenectady and some other stations, and then came to Madison to program the Fox, but he had that New York sensibility. Right. Yeah. So, the Fox sort of stole, in fact, I think the Fox jingles that we had, serving the universe.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Those are awesome. Yeah. Those are so cool. And there was a company called Hecht Enterprises that in the back of R&R, the Gavin Report, they'd have these ads that you could order major market air checks. So I would order Washington, D.C., and at the time it was Don and Mike and the Grease Man, and all these Howard Stern from way back, from
New York
88, but just that was so much fun listening to those major market guys and thinking, man, someday it would be so cool to work in a major market like that. And anyways, now I'm getting nostalgic. So I'm going to post a link to the video that you appear in and Radio DJ, because I think that's cool. So I'll put that link there. And of course, I want you all to go out and check out the Fizz. You can go to thefizzradio.com and listen. You can find it on Live 365 and listen there. Number of places you can listen. But thank you for sitting down and talking with me about this.
For sure.
And I've learned a lot from you, and I'll probably be picking your brain on some other things in terms of polish, making what I do sound more polished. And by the way, you reminded me of that video on Radio DJ with the link with his engineer friend Bob.
Right.
I uploaded those settings yesterday, and it helped. It did make a big difference at my station. I'm still tweaking some things. I'm not completely satisfied, but I'm a lot closer since doing that preset that you recommended. So thank you so much for that. So thank you, Chris, for being here. Everyone check out the Fizz, check out the links to his interview on Radio DJ, and we'll definitely be in touch with you more, Chris. So thank you so much for coming on last minute notice today too.
Awesome. So, yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. Glad to talk anytime.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a great weekend.
All right.
We'll see you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.